we are very happy that we have a global conversation with people from different places and from here, from home. So we can share experiences and learn from each other. Many thanks for being here, and I give the room to Pipo Serrano, our moderator.
Thank you very much. So let's all go in. Sonia.
Thank you.
Miquel. Yeah, you can be in that one, and we'll have Grace in the middle. Grace here, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. Thanks. So, good morning. Thank you, Rihanna. As you were saying, technology and digital revolutions are clearly one of the drive forces in today's world. But I feel like too many times, and we were talking about that before, we are, or we still are, stuck in this hype of technology, and we kind of think that people have to understand what is blockchain, what is 5G, what is AI, and probably they never explain them what was 4G and what was so many things that came before. So probably it doesn't really make sense. People does not mind about what is blockchain, really. People mind about science revolutions. People mind about how health can improve and help them on their illness detections, about anything that can transform and benefit their lives. And of course, how can all this help vulnerable people, communities with special needs, which is really relevant and important. Technology is always with us, as you can hear. So it's a need that has to be there and exist to serve people, not on the other way around. And many times we kind of lose our minds on that. So I'm very happy to talk about how technology can become and can be relevant for the people, which is kind of the important thing. And that's why we have today four amazing people. You'll see that, and I've been studying them a lot, which is something that I obsessively do as a journalist before talking with these people. And I found kind of addicted with their stories. I promise I found yesterday it was 2:30 at night, the day before it was 2, and the day before it was 1:30, and reading all their stories, even the manuals. You know these manuals from an NGO or from a community, reading them. I mean, you would never do that on your spare time, but I found it so amazing. And that's why I want to have them, explain you about them. They're really different perspectives. And I want to warn you that we will ask him many things, and I say we because I will start doing it, but I'll require your help. I would like you to share any question, any thoughts. You'll see there are a couple of faces. Initially, you'll be able to bring some questions through this Mentimeter. I don't know if you've ever heard, it's a strange name, but basically you write on your phone, you probably brought it, menti.com, it will come some kind of code kind of behind me. Basically, if you want the code, I can give it, but I mean, it's not sexy at all. 21 17 68, if you can remember that, perfect. And you can bring any question there. And at the end of the session, I'll translate that questions to our guests. And afterwards, you can kind of briefly say this session was about this concept, or it inspires me about this concept. So this is everything I had to say. I'm not going to talk much more today, because I think the important people is our guests. And I would like to start introducing them, but basically I would like to ask them to introduce themselves. Today we've got with us Sonia Fuertes. She's the Vice President of the Catalan Third Social Sector Platform, with facing like 3,000 entities and helping lots of communities around. So Sonia, whenever you want, I'd like to hear about you.
Good morning. I'm very happy also to be here, and quite exciting because it's my first panel in English. So
great.
I know you are very nice people, and so if we speak some Spanglish, maybe it would be okay. Now, I introduce myself. I started working in social action when I was 16 as a leisure instructor. So many years ago, about 30 years ago. And many things has changed since before. Usually I work on addictions, mental health, criminal enforcement, and all these areas. It's very important to have another vision about innovation, social innovation. Now I'm here also as a vice president from the Taula of the third sector, and that, as you say, is about 3,000 entities in Catalonia. And they are working to defend the social rights, protect the social rights, defend the social rights of all communities, not only for people with special needs. We think that we have to increase our democracy to be able to think about rights in another way, more inclusive, and to have a society, more equal society for all people. We have to face many challenges now, as poverty, inequality, precarious life, we say, and also displaced populations because of wars. And these challenges, only we can face it together.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Sonia. It's a pleasure having you here. We also have with us David McNeill. You'll see that, I don't know if we didn't do it on purpose, but we've got a more digital life in certain things and a more digital combined with amazing analogical things in this side. So let's jump now to Scotland for a moment with this sunny day, and let's say hello to David McNeill. It's a pleasure to have you here. He's the digital director of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organizations, and basically revolutionizing all that small communities and volunteers, charities with digital knowledge, skills, and all that. Whenever you want.
Good morning. It's great to be here in Barcelona, and it's a sunny day. We don't get very many of those in Scotland, so it's really a pleasure to be here and to talk about technology for people. The Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations is much like Tauna and here. We represent small community groups, charities, NGOs in Scotland, and do lots of different work. My role specifically is around digital and the third sector. This work started around 7 or 8 years ago. We were given the lead by the Scottish Government to tackle digital exclusion in Scotland. So communities, people in communities, particularly older people that were more vulnerable, that did not have digital skills, that didn't use the internet. And we would work with the third sector and organisations who are more likely to engage with those people to build their digital skills and confidence and capability. So we offer a whole range of grants and support to organisations working with the homeless, working with older people, working with people with mental health problems, so that they can use technology effectively. When we were doing that work to build the skills in communities, we realised that organisations themselves that were working in the third sector had very low digital confidence and capability themselves. People that didn't know what a survey monkey was, definitely never heard of a Mentimeter, although we use that too and everybody loves it, so I would encourage you to submit your questions using that. So we started a programme of work to look at digital transformation of the third sector. And how to build confidence and capability of organisations. A lot of that programme started working with leaders, so chief executives on boards of organisations. And I think chief executives of organisations came into our leadership programme thinking that digital, this technology thing, was all about having a new website or an app, or actually with leaders with big egos, it's about how I go on social media and tell the world how important I am. We took them on a program where we took them to technology companies, we took them to Uber, we took them to Skyscanner, the new apps, we took them to data scientists at universities. And at the end of the program, they realized, actually, the world has changed and moved on, and what we are doing as organizations is 10 years old, 20 years old. We've not changed and responded to the world. So we need to change as organizations ourselves. And we put out a call to the wider sector to say, you need to adapt and evolve what you do, and that's about leadership, that's about the culture of your organizations, that's about how you use data, how you use different types of technology, how you look at cybersecurity, and the implications of technology for people and the communities that they serve. So I suppose the big message that we give out, we often use the quote from Charles Darwin, that it's not the strongest or most intelligent of species that survive, it's the ones that are most responsive to change. And I think that is the same for organizations. The organizations need to respond to change, and that's what we are here to help them with.
Great. Thank you very much. Let's keep on going with Grace, and we will end with Miguel. Grace Mutung'u, you're a researcher of Information Communication Technologies Policies at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. And I've read amazing stories of what you do, and when you explain, for example, how everything changed in Kenya after the switching of 4 channels of televisions, and then the new constitution, many things that we'll discuss. I would like you to introduce yourself.
Okay. My name is Grace Mutung'u, or Bomu. I am an associate at the Kenya ICT Action Network, which is a space or platform for people and organizations interested in ICT policy reform in Kenya. And we basically do a lot of policy research and advocacy. When we do the policy research, we take it to members of parliament and members of county assemblies, which are subnational governments, to try and explain to them how they can leverage on technology to solve some of the problems that we have in our society. So we always like to use the word leveraging on technology to solve problems, because technology in itself is not the solution. It is just a tool that we can use to solve the problems that we have.
Great. Great to see it that way, and great to find that human part of it and the users. Miguel, an entrepreneur, someone who from very early stages started creating companies and trying to find some solutions to help people. He's in UpSocial. You probably heard about him, but I would like you to explain a bit about yourself.
Okay, good morning. Yes, I am the founder and CEO of a company called UpSocial, and we try and solve critical social challenges with proven innovations. So instead of inventing everything from scratch, we try and see whether some solutions have actually worked and deliver the social outcomes we need in different places. And so we work to adapt and adopt them in different locations. So, for instance, we work in Canada to try and see whether universities can be stronger and more active and proactive forces of social change in those local communities where they operate. Or we work here in Barcelona to find solutions to people with disabilities finding employment, or in the Basque Country trying to see whether we can find ways of preventing long-term unemployment. So these are the big issues. So we put the big issues on the table, particularly close to cities, because that is where the spaces for experimentations are very nice, and we find solutions all around the world to solve them. And I actually came from the world of NGOs some years ago, at the very beginning in the early 90s, trying to find the ways or document the ways in which people were escaping poverty. So this issue of innovation has always been at the very beginning of my professional career. So how do people get out of poverty, and documenting and see if this could inform public policy. And then tired of that, I moved to the UN, thinking that from the UN I could actually do it with a bit more power. But it actually ended up in the private sector. And so I'm doing sort of the contrary of what many people are doing now. Some of my friends in the late 40s, 50s, they are trying, how can I do meaningful work? So I just do the contrary. Yeah,
and you did some meaningful work also, for example, in Kenya, right? Yeah. You work in Kenya, and you've been after, for example, the fact that school is free for the kids in Kenya. So we've got things in common around. Before we start, or while we start with this, I would like you to, and like if this was a game, define what is social innovation. But I would like you to complete it. I mean, let's say Sonia starts. You give a bit of your insights on social innovation. You complement it with something else. Grace with something else. David with something else. So what is for you social innovation?
Social innovation is a process and also another way of thinking how to solve some needs, social needs that are not covered.
Great.
Short, because...
it's good.
Yeah, and I think simplicity is great. It's, I think, more effective, so better results, and social outcomes, so basically focused on social outcomes, so more effective solutions, more efficient solutions, so less resources to actually achieve these outcomes, and fairer results, meaning better opportunities for those who have had the least or the worst opportunities.
And?
I would say that it has a lot to do with meeting the needs of people, as opposed to cooking a meal somewhere else and presenting it to the people. It's about coming and meeting the needs that the people themselves have identified, and then solving that together.
And David?
I think it's about new ways of solving long-standing, complex problems for people, because none of the social issues that we see are simple. It's not a case of building an app, where it's about trying different ways to solve these bigger problems.
Great. So we've got now a quick draw on what social innovation is from several countries, from several point of views, from several moments in lives, in the way you face different communities. Do you have, any of you, an example, just to clarify, of some case study application, some project that was like, for you, it would define perfectly, there are many, but defines perfectly what social innovation is or has to be? David?
Yeah, my favorite example of social innovation starts with some young people in London, and the Royal Society for Blind Children, an NGO working in London, with a group of young people who they got them together and said, what would you like to do? What's your big problem? What do you face? And the big thing that came out was around travel and transport. Said they want to be able to get around London independently. And the charity had been set up to help those people with visual impairments or blind travel around London. So they gave them someone to go with them. But the feedback from the young people was, I don't want to be helped. I want to be independent. I want to do it myself and for myself. And that led to a long process to say, okay, how could we use mobile phones and the technology and then to navigate that? They worked with a design company in the private sector to come up with certain ideas. They managed to get Google involved. And actually, from that initial idea from young people, it has resulted in what's called Wayfinder, as an international standard for allowing blind and visually impaired people to navigate indoor spaces. And the idea that ultimately your app that you have to help you navigate the underground in London will be able to be the same app that allows you to navigate the app in Hong Kong. And all that started a great bit of a technology, an open standard, but also changing the way the organisation thought about how they worked on the issue that they served. It wasn't about helping people, it was about enabling, empowering people and making them be independent themselves.
And you said blind. Let me jump here, and sorry, because I'm going to introduce you. You maybe had your own idea, you can share it afterwards, but to a project that Miquel detected and he adopted and took to Mexico, Colombia, called Discovering Hands, that has a lot to do with blind. That's why I wanted to jump to you. Can you explain that? Because it's probably the one I felt in love most. I mean, there are lots that are amazing, but I thought it was such a clever, a smart, and a win-win solution. Can you go with that?
This is a German doctor, that a gynecologist, that basically sees that the fact that women aged from 30 to 50, they get very quick tests on finding potential tumors in the breast. So he started thinking, how can we do it a bit better? How can we discover potential breast cancer at a very early stage for women that wouldn't do the scanner and so on? And so he started training blind women as medical tactile examiners. And some blind women have amazing tactile abilities. So basically he teaches them and he trains them in trying to discover these tumors. And when they find one with a tactile ability, they find tumors that are 5 millimeter big, when the doctor, with his own tactile ability, is 1.5 centimeter. So it's 3 times smaller. This difference is basically a difference between stage 1 and stage 2 in a breast cancer. Stage 1 has 97% survival rate, stage 2 has 67% survival rate. So it's 30 points difference. These are a lot of lives saved. So in a way, what he does is activating latent resources. So these are special capacities of blind people to try and detect and put them at the service of community. So it's a win-win situation for everyone, right? And instead of selling coupons and lottery on the street, they can do something that is actually, delivering a lot of value to society.
Yeah, you see, it's not technological. There's no robots. There's no AI. There's no nothing. It's analogical, which is great. It's great. The expert can detect that tumor in between 13 and 15 millimeters, and these women can do it in between 4 and 6 millimeters. It's a win-win, and they will feel they're doing something great for society. They can do something which is relevant for them, relevant for these own people. It's so amazing. I'm a fan of that one. Sonia.
I was thinking of that we have many examples of
there are tons.
applications, or especially in situations that requires education, people with special needs, with robots, or applications with gender violence victims, or Alzheimer. People who has Alzheimer has a tool of a lot of devices to be safe. But I think that Miquel, maybe it's an analogical example, I don't know, but he introduced something that I think is crucial when we're speaking about technology as a tool that can make community, can empower community and empower people, and has to introduce people on all this process. I think that's a good example, because sometimes we think technology as separate from people, communities, and for us it's the big mistake. We have to include people, and at least on all this process, when we finish the process, the community has to be more powerful, and has to be more tools.
Absolutely. Great. Any example that you can just share, and that you saw something, that you changed something, that you learned? Maybe you didn't do it, but...
Okay. Also, when I think about social innovation, while it is true that a lot of the examples we give, or what comes to mind, has a lot to do with poverty and people with disability and so on, I also like to think of social innovation as just also meeting the needs of people, not necessarily to solve some of these there's an obsession with poverty in the world right now. Even the Sustainable Development Goals are about poverty. For us, I think, for me, I also like us to think about people just being happy, and not being so concerned about pulling them out of poverty. The example I'd like to give is something called Skiza Tunes in Kenya, which is a very simple idea that when I call you on your mobile phone, as I'm waiting for you to pick up the phone, I listen to your favorite song. And it's something that is a big deal now in Kenya. All the artists have a scheme through which once they have a new song, they take it to a collective management company, and then these songs are taken to the mobile network operators, and then we consumers can buy the tunes. So every time somebody calls us, or whenever I call my mother, for example, she's not on Facebook, she's not on YouTube, so I can't tell her favorite songs from Facebook because she's not on Facebook. Whenever I call her, I listen to the song that she's listening to, her favorite song. And I always think that that is so innovative because, first of all, artists are earning money in a whole new way. They do not have to take their songs on radio. They do not have to have internet connection. All they have to do is to take their songs to a collective management company, and then later the mobile network operator gives them royalties from all the people who've listened to their songs. So it is also good to think about social innovation as even in the what we'd call quote unquote normal society, not just in the quote-unquote marginalized parts of society, because the interesting thing about Skizatunes is that even people who live below the poverty line will buy the Skizatune because they find it a nice way of expressing themselves, that every time people call them, they have an expression to share with whoever is calling them.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You were all talking about changes, about revolutions, little revolutions that make big changes. Are all these changes something that happens fast, or it takes a lot of time? I mean, do we have a microwave, or do we have a slow cooker, and we do a cooking with low temperature, like if we're some chefs with this?
It depends on the revolution that you want.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me which one needs the
yeah.
microwave.
No, I think if we try to have more quality in our democracies, we have to balance the tension between security related to technology, security, and lack of privacy. And to build a strong community, I think it's important to habilitate more spaces for governance. Mm-hmm. So the revolution, if we consider revolution as to build an inclusive society for all of us, we have to rethink the way that we are organized. And we have to rethink maybe our democracies to be more deliberative and more participation and not only representation. I think that is the idea. And technology can serve to this goal, or maybe can be a good way to have more control to people.
Wow. And I was asking about the microwave. You opened so many things that I don't know where to go now, but let me just finish that part that you opened, and then we go back to the microwave. You said better democracies.
Yeah.
Maybe rethinking democracies. And I think this is something debated in Digital Future Society many times, and I think it's interesting. How should we manage that e-governance, that digital governance with the society? I mean, do we have to say, I vote you, and during 4 years you'll do what you want? Because you've got maybe the big picture, and you can represent me, and even if sometime I think that you're not right, you've got the whole picture, and probably you have to do what you do? Or I choose you, but after that I want to choose many other things that are going to affect in my life. And I know that we're surfing a bit out of social innovation, but kind of, I mean, public innovation, social innovation is connected. What do you all think, Miquel?
On this, I think that we have a problem in society with democracy, the way we participate. I think we live in a world that is input accountable and not outcome accountable. Input accountable means that we care very much on how the money is spent and how what are the things we are going to do. And I think we have to start getting obsessed with what are the things, not with what we are going to do, but what we are going to achieve with these resources. And achieving is something that suddenly is somehow out of the picture. And when we work in the social sector, when you work with government, it's like, yes, I want, I measure your commitment on the basis of the amount of budget you're going to devote to that. It doesn't matter whether this budget is going to be spent in something good or not, whether it works or not. So why don't we start I'm not saying that we don't look at the way the money is spent and so on, but we have to start putting the same level of attention to the outcomes. And if we want outcomes, then suddenly the way in which you spend money is actually by making people participate and getting more engaged. And in certain parliaments in Ireland, you have a parliament where there are citizens that participate directly as members, almost members of parliament, just by choice, not by choice, by randomly. So, you have 99 citizens sitting in the parliament in Ireland, participating in certain decisions, and they actually bring a different viewpoint because they are not linked to certain parties and political dynamics that... So there are many innovations around that makes participation more meaningful in order to achieve better results.
It's amazing, yeah. I think it's a great view. What do you guys think?
I'd say there's a generational gap that has a lot to do with digital technologies. By generational, I don't necessarily mean young and old. I mean it has a lot to do with users of technology and non-users of technology, or people who have not taken the new mindset. So, for example, an example I can give in Kenya is, or in Africa generally, is that when elections are happening and there's so much talk on the internet, you'll find that the people from the old mindset cannot withstand all this expression, all this political expression on the internet, and they think that the solution is to completely shut down the internet. Well, that is not the solution, because the people who live in the internet will always find a way to keep on communicating and expressing themselves and inventing new ways and new technologies of communicating. So there's definitely need for bridging the gap between these two generations if we are to move forward as humanity.
Yeah, and in your country, I remember I read that the telecommunication companies, there was a moment in where they said to the big guys in the government, or you stop playing and messing with the connections and all that, or we take the connection. There is no more internet. Like saying, come on, stop playing with them. I mean, this is not about we're going to cut the connection. I mean, we all know what happened in Arab Spring. We all know how there were all that content delivered through fences to family and friends, and so it doesn't make sense. The way in Turkey and some other voices like Speak Now with Twitter connected, they were sending. So it doesn't make sense. David, what do you think about this public governance that we're saying? How does it have to be?
Well, I think being from United Kingdom is not a great shining example of democracy at the moment, which is interesting. I think on the what can go fast and what can go slow in democracy, now technology is enabling us to create movements very quickly. So we see that in all kinds of things. Where on the Brexit theme, there were 6 million people signed the petition to revoke Brexit. Obviously, the impact of that being very low on the politicians. But then there's other things that we've seen. So, in the context of the horrible kind of school shootings in America, we've seen the young people come up and campaign and really create a massive movement and momentum around legislation change. But actually, they've created a high-profile movement. But can they affect real change when you've got really kind of tough, long-standing, hardened attitudes there? So you can create a movement quickly now using technology, but can you create real change on complex issues? And
but that's interesting. I mean, technology is changing many things fast, and we all can see that. Of course, the speed is different in several countries. And probably it's not the same it was in Kenya or it is in Kenya, although it is now. Then in UK, you've got a double thing in democracy there. You're Scottish also, never forget that. And there are several speeds, but there are some benefits, like the ones you pointed out, but which is a harmful part, which is like the cons part of that speed of technology for our society, and especially for some societies with digital divide, no internet connection, and they just get into it, which is a harmful part. Is there a harmful part?
I think one of these cons is about lack of privacy. The other maybe is sometimes there's no sustainable technology, and I think the other one that he says is like to balance the velocity of its speed in technology and the velocity of changes in society that is not as fast. So I think it's the other, and we can think also the others. If you watch Black Mirror, is a good example of cons of technology, I think, no? But many of these cons are related to the priorities that we make as a community. And if we put technology as a tool of servicing people and communities, I think it has more advantage than cons.
Miquel?
I think that there is a problem with the speed in terms of what you measure. And this is the important thing. So going back to the outcome accountable, right?
Sorry, you'll hear that from Miquel many times because he's passionate on measuring impact.
And if you want to measure what matters, which is social change. You were saying, is there a microwave to social change? Are there accelerators or catalyzers of social change? They are. But then to measure what happens to them takes time, because it's like, yes, we can measure how much impact we had on the satisfaction of people getting in a room, getting trained to become employable, long-term unemployed through a course, and you expect, oh yeah, they were happy. This is irrelevant whether they were happy. 3 years later, have they managed to get back into the job market? Have they contributed to the social security for at least 18 months? So if you want to measure what matters, you need time. And also, if you want to measure what matters and look at the collaterals, because that's a problem of technology, sometimes is that we are just focused on one thing. And life is not departmentalized. So you really need to look at the whole thing of what happens. When in Kenya, we did, in UNICEF, we supported Kenya to make primary education free in 2003. Through a change in elections, and we were so happy in UNICEF and shouting the world, we have made 2 million children got into school that year. But a few months later, many of the children were not going back to school because the schools were not relevant, because the teachers were not showing up. We had a shortage of teachers. The problem wasn't the fees, wasn't only the fees. So the problem is that a child that goes to a school and finds that the teacher comes, 3 days a week instead of coming 5, or that, you are finding yourself in a classroom with 80 people, age 8 to 12. What do you do with it? And this guy leaves the school, doesn't come back. How do you convince him to come back to school? So the collaterals are very, very important. So if you start measuring things at the short term, you're just really missing the picture.
Well, you'll have to bring an amazing story, because this guy made something impossible for our generation. He got the kids to love maths. Technically impossible in our generation list, but we'll go with that afterwards. I remember reading a statement in one of the manuals I was telling I was fascinated from David and the corporation, which was from Justin Trudeau, that says the pace of change has never been this fast, yet it will never be this slow again. Which kind of can be worrying or not, but if everything is so fast, if everything changes so fast, how can we make it to kind of include people? I mean, my obsession on this is digital transformation, is social connected to digital always inclusive, or many times because of that speed it gets exclusive?
And I think the exclusive problem starts when you start with technology rather than the problem, particularly when designing public services. So in Scotland and the United Kingdom, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, there was the agenda of digital by default. We will move all our public services online because that's cheaper to provide, because it costs £10 to provide a service face-to-face, it costs £2 to provide it over the telephone, and it costs 10 pence to do it online. And that was the driver, was to reduce the cost to the public purse, not because it might be a better way to do it. So actually, because they started with that premise that let's move everything online, they forgot the risk of excluding people there, and I think that's a risk. And it's, for the most part, moving public services online is a good thing, because for the majority of us, probably everyone in this room, that's how we want to interact. We want to deal with, we don't want to deal with taxis, but we want to deal with taxes and the government, and we will want to do it online and get over with as quick as possible. But for perhaps some of the more vulnerable in society that rely on public services more, people that are unemployed, that are on benefits, they are less likely to be able to be confident users of technology, to have internet connections, to have the data on their mobile phones to access it. So they end up being excluded, or more excluded, or risk further being excluded because they can't use the technology to access the public service. And you're creating different unintended impacts, because perhaps the person that went into the local government office once a week to collect their benefit check, that was the only social interaction that they had all day. And if they can do it online, they then have no social interaction that day or that week. So when it starts with the technology and not looking at the other consequences for the people that use that service, that's where the risks come.
I was thinking on that, on you, Grace, because if I don't remember, if I'm not wrong, after the switching off in Kenya, there was switching off 4 channels from the government, and that was kind of a crisis because even people knew that there were biased channels. Everybody meets at 7 in the evening to watch the news, knowing that they were going to tell them whatever they wanted, but it doesn't matter. They were sharing things and talking and all that. After the switching, there started a bit of a revolution. In 2010, there was a new constitution in Kenya. They accepted freedom of speech, freedom of press, and everything started to change with digital revolutions and all that. And on that speed, you faced something that I thought it was really amazing to learn, which is the way everybody was sharing, especially through facing elections, a lot of content on that elections through WhatsApp, mostly, memes. And maybe you can tell us who was behind that and how everything changed. I mean, because in a place, in a territory where initially it was not that connected, so fast it gets connected and people is getting all that content. How was that?
Maybe the other thing I need to say about Kenya is that there are parts of Kenya that are better connected than Barcelona.
Yeah.
Kenya has many shades, and then there are parts of Kenya that are very underserved. And this is true for many African countries. There's always the
double split.
Yes, the double. Yeah, and many cities are very well connected. The political actors in 2017 had realized that digital was the way to go as far as elections are concerned. And they have very innovative use of technology because all the parties hired a lot of young people, and they had sort of meme factories where these young people would translate every event that happened into a political meme. And this kind of content is very easy to consume because even for the semi-literate people, if you send them a little meme, you give them an idea, and if they laugh about it, they want to share it with everybody in their group. And so WhatsApp, which makes it very easy to share content. I hope most of you are WhatsApp users. Okay, at least you understand what I'm talking about, because it's something that's very widely used in countries like Kenya. So people trust what they get from their friends and family. So when you get a meme and then you spread it to your friends and family, and it goes on, so it's quite viral. And so this, in the end, helped to suppress some voters and also make others who are not going to vote, whose vote was going to be silenced, make some of those voters come out. So technology is really changing us really fast in ways we could not have anticipated. And right now we are discussing ways to better use technology, because it is not in doubt that technology is a tool that we can use to communicate not just to the minds of people, but also to their hearts, and to change and to target their emotions. So how can we use this for good?
Yeah, and as you were saying, in many jurisdictions, there is e-citizen, e-voting. There's a lot of kind of innovative ways to participate in a social debate. When talking about that, one thing is the speed, but there is something else which is the revolution. How does it have to be? How can we change things? And how big it has to be. Sonia, I read you saying many times that for any of those revolutions, we need to be able to think different. Yeah. And basically innovate in our practices. How can we start changing this? How can we start revolutionizing it?
I think that we have to think different, and the first thing that we have to consider that is we can talk about an inclusive society when we have, for example, in Europe, 25% of people who are at risk of poverty. That's the main idea that we have to consider, and we have also a society with two speeds, as we say. No, people, rich people are every time richer, and poor people are every time more poor. So, I think it's the first idea. You talk about inclusive or exclusive,
Yeah.
and I want to connect this because it's the same in medicine, for example, in health. There's many diseases that has a lot of billions to do research, for example, and there's the others, the malaria and others that not. So I think it's very important to put the idea of inclusive society in the center, and it's associated for all people. And after we can find out how technology can help to achieve an inclusive society. And it's not only to solve problems, also to predict problems.
Absolutely.
Considering that people is not, we not attend people in a lab, but we can predict also solutions. So technology maybe is a tool to do this, but we have to rethink all this. And especially in poverty, we have to consider also that poverty is a lack of freedom. When people are poor, it's impossible that they can build a project of life, and we have to think, to rethink all this.
You said prediction, which I thought it was really interesting and made me think on the last Congress with Digital Future Society, talking with Fabio Stable, who's an analyst and expert at Brazil, and he was saying basically that in Brazil this last year, they introduced the online registration only for kids to go to school. So you had to register them only through the internet. In a country that only has 54% of people connected, you know which is the result, right? No one thought on predicting. 1/3 of kids are not in school this year. It's kind of crazy, but that happens. And that's why it's interesting to have these debates. You were getting close to that revolution, and when I said before that this has to be maybe revolutions of microwave or slow cooking, Miguel normally tends to say that slow cooking is the solution, that things has to be measured, analyzed, and they need to take some time. But something that I thought was very interesting when we thought on how we change things is, do we have to innovate always? Because it looks like everything has to be new, everything has to be great. And then there's a lot of people saying, well, everything is invented. How do we do? You take and you discover great things outside and you bring them in, or you take them to other places. How does this revolution have to be in that sense?
When I left UNICEF, I joined Ashoka. Ashoka is a sort of a global network of innovators all around the world that are changing a system, a social system. No, so there are 3,000. They normally get in. There are 3,300 fellows, Ashoka fellows, all around the world that are changing the health system or the education system and so on. Right. And one of the programs is called Globalizer. So they try and see how these innovators can scale up their ideas, their project, which is very good. It's very good. And I joined Ashoka thinking that I could contribute to help them scale up. But then I discovered that actually the problem wasn't the supply side. So the problem is, yes, there are all the solutions, most of the solutions that we need today here in Barcelona or wherever have been already invented. This is, in my opinion, it's a fact, right? So they haven't been invented. So the fact is, let's look and find them, right? But then I discovered that there is a hell of a lot of potential if you organize demand-driven processes. So if you start working here with the city of Barcelona and you ask them, how do you want to solve the problem of people with disabilities not accessing a decent job and not accessing, a full life? And then we started looking, okay, what are the business models that actually tap into the special abilities? Or how do we solve the problem of early school abandonment? And we saw the power of math. No? How mathematics are so important at early age so that children don't label themselves, I am a math-enabled person, math-phobic somehow. No? And if I am a math-phobic, I start like guaranteeing my failure in school for the entire year. And for my entire life as a student. And I still have a daughter that she says that she's a letters person, a wording person, but she doesn't like to write and read. She just is math phobic. So it's like, no, you're not that. And it's not a problem of your cables. It's like innovation that actually can deliver you in a way that you can actually learn math. Everyone can learn the math that we need in primary and secondary education. It's just the way in which we've been teaching. But I've lost the question that you wanted to ask. So
No. I was asking about if those revolutions have to be short, in second, basically, slowly, and secondly, if you have to create new solutions or adapt them. But you already explained it.
Yeah.
So great. In that sense, and I read it from all of you. All these revolutions, we're trying to define how to revolutionize the world so that you get out of this session today and you start changing it. And that would be fantastic if you follow these people. But many of you said, and I read, that these changes somehow have to start in small, in local, in little kind of communities or places and then make them bigger. But big revolutions in global are hard to. Do you feel it that way? You start like, David, when you do your digital revolutions, when you train communities of volunteers, do you think that you need to start with some charities, for example, when they had some problems with cybersecurity and tell them how to train them?
I suppose it depends on the issue, and I think a lot of things do need to start small, and when they work, and the investment and the conditions are right, they can scale very quickly. But starting small, I think any technology company will tell you, you start small, you test, you learn, you focus, and then grow and scale for impact. It's really hard to start with a big idea. I don't think Facebook would have started with the vision of having 3 billion people online. They started in one college. And I think we've seen lots of social innovation that's happened that way. I think the challenge is it's very few things get beyond the small and local. And that's because, for two reasons. One, because some organizations don't have the vision to scale their impact. They focus very much on the local, the issue that faces them, and not thinking how whatever problem they're solving could be solved, and not just for their community, the country, the world. So there's maybe a lack of ambition in some organizations, but also there's a lack of investment models that make that work. Strangely, in the third sector, certainly in Scotland, it's completely opposite to how funding in the private sector would work. Because in the private sector, you would come up with a great innovation, you would solve a problem, people would see the potential of it and throw more money into it to scale the impact. Whereas the way funding works in the third sector is you do a great project, you have great information, to say that works, that's great, but we want something new next time. I want something different. And there's just not the money, the same investment model to scale for impact. And actually lots of social innovations that I see in the world have ended up being, maybe started out with the idea of being non-profit and had to move to a private business model to get the impact and the scale and investment that they actually need to grow.
Yeah, I was thinking on that, not just on small in the sense of small groups, but I don't know if you, Grace, have had that experience, but many times when we say that supporting small town innovation, for example, matters, in the sense that these people can change the harm cost, but from the bottom. If you go to a rural place or you go to a small local city, you can change really lots of things because it's on them. The big change can come from them.
True, but also the way our societies are organized is that the government is such a key player in every change that happens. when you spoke about Brazil and registration of children online, it's the same with a lot of low and middle income countries. Governments are doing these big digitalization programs, and the first step is digital ID for everybody, including children. And it's something that's actually driven by the development partners, and it's supported from the UN, it's supported from the World Bank, and so on and so forth. So our reality is that many times our projects are very much driven by what the government is doing, and so we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that the government policies are right, and that they're policies that will support this very long-term kind of projects. So for us also, I mean, the issue of innovation in this case, we have to look at it from the tools of production, the means of production for innovation, because many times we come in as end users, as consumers of technology. When government is doing these big projects, they buy already existing technology instead of creating the technology and spurring local people to create solutions, or at least to learn how to create solutions. So I think this is almost tragic as far as the internet is concerned. We don't produce any hardware, we don't produce any software. We are waiting on other people to do it from elsewhere, and then our small part is in adopting it to our situation, and this is something that needs to change. We need to do it the other way around. Whether we are starting small or big, we need to learn more on how to produce and not just consume.
How do you think that you just pointed out now about governance? You said they mark a lot the line they just pointed. How do you think this revolution has to be? Is it a joint venture in between public and private? Do we have to negotiate with governments in order to try to do things right? How does it work? You guys have been negotiating, Sonia. I know you have a lot of work dealing with administration and saying we want to change that. How does it work?
I think if we talk about local and local networks, in order to have a change, I think that's very important, and to do the policies from bottom up, from the bottom. But it's important also to fight for a global change, not only local.
Absolutely.
So in this process, we have to learn some skills and also to be able to transfer knowledge. I think that's one of the keys. But you're talking about the joint with government and the public, private, universities, entrepreneurial systems.
Of course.
For us is the key, because the collective intelligence is the only way to solve these problems. But sometimes we have to be conscious that when government take an initiative, local initiative, sometimes this initiative can die. Mm-hmm. So it's important to share the leadership between all the actors, all the agents involved. Because when you want to have the initiative and to be the leader, maybe you can kill the process.
Okay, how do you see it, Miguel?
Yeah, a collaboration between sectors. I mean, my vision is that if you don't need it, don't collaborate. Because it's painful, it's costly, it takes time, it's boring. Now, having said that, if you want to be systemic, so if you think that you are just working on a patch, and you don't need a patch, you need a systemic change, then perhaps you have to start considering that collaboration is more than a need.
But come on, you always say, don't put band-aids, go to the MRS, so it has to be systemic, then you have to collaborate. It has to be systemic.
Therefore, I contradict myself.
Okay.
It has to be systemic.
Just wanted to clarify.
But it shouldn't be transactional. So many relationships between private sector and government and NGO, they are transactional. I give you this, you give me that. And what I'm talking about is about integrating capacities so that, you know, between the three elements, we actually deliver a systemic change. But then if I contradict again myself. There is an amazing book called The Natural History of Innovation by Stephen Johnson. And he talks about how change happens. He basically documents how change happens all around the world. It's called where good ideas come from, and the natural history of innovation. And he basically ended up saying that one of the ways in which things change is with patches. That you think that by just moving a small step, you do something that doesn't seem systemic, but then suddenly something else is possible. It's called the adjacent possible. That's a theory of change, the adjacent possible. You do a step in one direction, and suddenly so many things are possible that were not possible before. So there are ways in which you have to think systemic. It doesn't mean that the way to get there needs to be systemic, and it doesn't mean that collaboration is always the best way, but the best way is always collaborating by integrating capacities. Yeah. If it makes any sense, I hope. It
does make, absolutely. All the contradictions make sense. How do you see it? Public, private, we can contradict both?
Well, again, a lot of public-private partnerships in low and middle-income countries. We also have to talk about, you know, multinational corporations, because they're the ones who also come in with a lot of ideas that are exported or imported from wherever they were. And they have a lot of capacity to make agreements with governments, because when agreements are being made at a bilateral or multilateral level, they have the capacity through their governments or whatever they're powerful. They have the capacity to come in. So some of the things we've seen working to stop this kind of transactional relationship and have a longer, more sustainable and helpful, and where there's transfer of knowledge, is when there's local involvement, whether the private partnership is a multinational or a local company. The local involvement really matters, because that's where there can be real knowledge, that is transfer of knowledge, that is where there can be real learning, and that is where even the locals can really contribute to defining their own problems, even when the project is super, super huge. And I've seen countries that even put percentages of how much local involvement has to be. It has to be, I don't know, half or 30% or whatever it is. But I think this is really important, especially for countries that have not traditionally had a lot of capacity in areas such as technology, so that we avoid this whole flying in to come and resolve problems of people you have really no idea about. Yeah.
David, public-private?
I think there's scope for more of it, particularly with the startup type community. I mean, private sector are very good, banks in particular, at looking at small financial technology companies and learning from them, investing in them, buying them, taking them into, so because it brings that innovation, new ideas into a big complex organization. And we don't really do that as much in the social sphere. We have big NGOs that are solving complex problems, but often are very stuck in the ways of doing things. And then often you have good intentions, social entrepreneurs that create products and services that have good intentions, but are probably, they could learn from the experience. The example that homelessness seems to be one where I see lots of startup social entrepreneurs trying things. Some of the ideas are very well intentioned, but bad, like QR codes on a homeless person to donate to them is very demeaning and not. But if that social entrepreneur had worked with a homelessness organization, they actually might have learned from each other and built technology and solved a real problem. It's just we don't see a lot of that. Private sector are good innovators, bringing innovators in. Social, public sector, less so. There's one example in Scotland which is quite good, called CivTech, and it's a new model of public procurement. So rather than the public sector saying we need to buy 700 of these things, they are putting out a challenge that says we need to count the number of visitors in a remote rural area where there's no electricity and there's no internet connections. How do we do that? And then a company comes along and said, oh, we could solve this. They provide some seed funding, and then they create a new product. So the public sector, in one sense, it's about technology, but actually it's a new model of public procurement, not buying things, but saying, here is our challenge, how can you help us?
Homelessness, you said, and that made me think of Sonia.
Yeah.
Also because we were saying public-private, but Sonia is an advocate a person who always demands work from the people, the society, neighborhoods, associations, activists, academics, and everyone. How do you think, because you wrote a lot about that, but how does that interaction between organizations and participation can work and work as a necessary kind of antidote for survival in this social transformation? How do we make it work?
Yeah,
and afterwards I will ask you about the homelessness, and you know what I mean when I say the roof, if that's all or not. But
yeah, because we always say that there's not the roof the solution, because people need a home, not only a roof. And it's a question related to dignity and vital project. No, I think that's important idea, and especially with homeless people, the apps and the mobile phone. Sometimes people say that he's poor and he's homeless and he has a mobile phone, but for them it's a big difference to have mobile to access to some resources. So that's important. Now I was thinking about the difference between the big non-profits and the small non-profits, some gap, digital gap, and how we can solve it. And I think that's a big question for us. We have to like an antidote, to find some collaborations to fight against this gap. And also we have to promote the hybrid profiles to work in the social organizations with technological formation. We have to approach our realities to these profiles, because we need to take a step in order to be more innovative in this field.
You, David, I was thinking now about this. There's something I thought was very interesting on the way Sonia says, for example, that we need to think differently. And I read from David that he said we maybe should think differently also on volunteering. And instead of volunteering on the traditional way, let's see which is the biggest company of volunteers. You know it. Wikipedia.
Wikipedia, yeah.
Do that people work writing every single day, helping to other people to contribute? Or do they do it on a different way? How do you explain that thing about the volunteering, which I think it's amazing?
Yeah, I think that people don't realise that Wikipedia and that it's changed. That used to be a model where you bought an encyclopedia that was created by experts, and now the world as experts and volunteers contribute to that knowledge, and it's run by a non-profit. So that's a different way, and people don't realise that that's a new way of doing things and a new way of volunteering. And people are doing it because they're quite passionate about the issue that they're contributing knowledge towards. So there's lots of ways of changing volunteering. The other example I love is Park Run, which is, I don't think it's made it to Spain yet, but Park Run is around the world, started in London, and it's weekly runs. Volunteers organise a 5-kilometre run, and you come along and you do it, and volunteers scan you in and scan you out with your times. And it's gone worldwide. Millions of people contribute to a park run and volunteer to help out and do it. And that's because people are passionate about running, and that's a whole community that's come up. So there's loads of ways that we can be connected in the modern world and volunteer, not just going along to one place once a week or
That's amazing. It made me think on Peter Glor. I don't know if you've ever heard about him. This guy was, he worked at MIT Institute. He was at, he's in many places, but he was one of the guys that initially had to create the website, World Wide Web, with Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee knew about him, and he offered him, and he said, no thanks, although he was one of the first guys who made a connection possible. And he afterwards went to the private, and then he said, this is too much, I get a lot of money, but I don't live, so he went back to Massachusetts Institute of Technology and blah, blah, blah. And this guy talked a lot about COIN. I don't know if you've heard about collaboration, innovation, innovation networks, and the way everything can change if there's this innovation. And that made me think on, if in a way you think that because of this collaboration globally through digital, are we better than before or not?
It's
quick silence.
It's not a yes/no kind of answer. We are, of course, better in some ways. I think about the knowledge that has been liberated for use by everybody, and how I know so much, for example, about Barcelona, which would have been impossible because I don't think there would have been books about Barcelona in libraries in Kenya, which is, a former English. We have an English history, so there are so many ways in which this liberation has helped us. So this is a very positive thing. Also, another positive thing is it's not only been me knowing about Barcelona, which is obviously a higher income place than where I come from. It's also, we are getting to know more and more about how other thought processes, other religions, other ways of thinking, which is, I think, the key to a lot of these changes that we are seeing. When you read about or when you learn about how people who are different from you do their things, and then apply that and adopt it maybe to your life and come up with a new product, then this is just good. And there's I see much more good than bad.
There's still some.
But there's still some bad.
Mm-hmm. Do you think we're better or worse? Just in a quick.
It may be better, but we have to evaluate the impact always, because if we think, for example, at the MOOC, the open education, that's we can say that it's a revolution because you can access to many contents, but the studies say that only, especially people with high studies, use the MOOC. So we have to evaluate always the impact, because we can use technology for the access for all people, not only for people who has this access.
Of course. Just let me ask something to David, because it has a lot to do with the last thing you said, the access to technology or the access to broadband, as you said in many jurisdictions. David is someone who's always saying it's not about having internet access many times. It's about many more things, and it's pretty similar to the roof. Yeah. The roof doesn't make the home. The internet does not make the digital kind of environment with accessibilities, and we tend to think the digital gap is only having the connection, and it can be many other things, and you always talk about that skills, that training. How's that?
Well, I think we talk on the digital exclusion that there's three core aspects. One is the motivation piece, is actually, do I want to go online and use the internet? And this not exclusively, but for older people, that is one of the main barriers that you need to overcome first. So there's nothing online for me, and the key is finding the right hook for them to go online and see that there's a world out there for them. But it's not exclusively about older people. So motivation is one. Access is the other, so actually you need to be able to afford an internet connection and the right device to do the thing at the right time. Because yes, the world is full of people with mobile phones now, but if you need to complete a job application, you're not going to be able to do that easily on a mobile phone. So it's the access to the internet and the right device. But then finally the skills to be able to use it effectively. And that's, That's not about the ability to use Facebook or YouTube. And this is where the issue for young people comes up. There is the myth of the digital native, that young people are digital natives. But actually, most are not very digitally skilled. They can send 500 Snapchats a day, but try to get them to complete a job application or fill out a form. That's not one that everybody has, and we assume that's because they spend so much time on their mobile phones. So people do need all three aspects to be fully included.
Great. Better or worse than before? Sorry.
2018 was the best year in humanity by far. By far.
218.
Yeah, last year.
Okay.
Last year was the best year. I mean, if you look at...
How are we doing it this half of the year? 19.
Well,
pretty good.
I mean, it's
kind of
depends on. It's difficult to measure.
We'll see how it finishes.
Difficult to measure.
It.
If you measure what matters, extreme poverty has been halved. The number of children that are vaccinated before the end of the first year of life is almost at 80%. If you look at the number of girls finishing primary school, is the highest in history. So if you look at what matters, actually we are much better. And technology and digital technology has actually been played a part in that. Obviously, it brings a lot of problems, new problems. But you know, if you measure what matters, it's been the best year. And if some of the questions here, one question was about the third world. So how do we speak about the third world? Well, there's no third world anymore. There's no fourth world anymore. There is a world where there are people without opportunities, without any decent opportunity. And there are people, like my children, that are obese of opportunities. Obese. I mean, they see opportunities passing one after the other, and they don't grab any of them because, you know, there's another one coming up.
Yeah, maybe it's better.
So, and this happens in Kenya, and it happens in South Africa, and it happens in Kuala Lumpur. So it doesn't matter where, but you know, the world is one world. It's not three, third, fourth, or whatever. No? So I think language is important.
Yeah, but I mean, I admire your optimistic point of view, which for sure it's true. I mean, if we look at it in a general way. But when you talk about poor or poverty, we all know there are several ways to look at poverty. And Sonia many times talks about what some time ago was, we all imagine as poverty. Now it's tremendous in, let's say, in people working, people having a salary, but people being extremely poor and with a roof sometimes, but not a home, with connection sometimes, but with nothing to do. And no, so poverty is also...
I agree with the optimistic attitude.
No, it's great.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be
it's
optimistic.
It's great, and we have to have an
attitude or data. I
optimist.
brought data.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, but I think that's important to. There's only one planet, globalized planet. No, we're living in globalization, but maybe the risk is the only thing that circulates freely is the capital, not the people. Many people see their rights restricted. So I think we have to consider this. And we can develop a positive attitude, always. Because I think we're working in social sector for this.
Absolutely.
Because we're optimistic and we think that we can change many things. But that's the point, not forget all these people.
Absolutely. We will start finishing the session before we go with some of your questions. I would like to know, because we promised to say it, how did you make it? The kids loving maths. I mean, we need to know it.
It wasn't me. It wasn't me.
Well, it was a project that you adopted, but you brought it here and it worked.
Well, yeah, this is an innovation called Jump Math. It's a Canadian innovation created by John Myton, who basically has changed the way in which we teach math. If you remember how we teach math, we're going to do some math. But if you remember how we teach math, and you want to, for instance, do a multiplication of a fraction.
Take that out of me, please.
Right?
With that.
So, how do we teach ourselves? Is by saying, you know, you multiply this one by this one and the bottom by the one on the bottom. That's how we learn, right? Now, I had 150 teachers in front of me a few months ago, and I was asking them to explain this to me with cakes. Not a single teacher in primary school, not a single teacher was able to explain it to me with cakes. One said, we multiply cakes. And I said, what does it mean, multiply cakes? Yes, I would love to multiply cakes, but this is not about multiplying cakes. It's about cutting cakes, and then someone needs a piece, and then you glue it again and cut it again in fair pieces, and blah, blah, blah. Well, it doesn't matter. But what we are basically doing, and what he is doing, he created a program that actually works in every single school because he plans every single session. So thinking about scale and solutions is thinking about industrial solutions. So that's why here is where technology makes sense. For me, the key for technology is that it suddenly is scalable, makes it scalable something that wasn't scalable. So this guy has thought, okay, I need to make every single teacher a good math teacher. So he planned every single lesson of the year for every course. And that's, I think, the key. I mean, he did it, he knew how to teach well in steps and from the concrete to the abstract. But the key element was, how do we make it work in every single school? So he created something, he packaged it in a way that every single teacher can just follow the guide and do it in his classroom. And I think this is the merit of the idea, not just thinking, again, in patches, but thinking industrial from the very beginning. So yes, you can start small, but you plan in big and you test big because you test already industrial, because otherwise you falsify your test and your prototype, right? So this is...
How many schools now?
In the world?
Yeah.
In the world there are, I don't know, 100,000, in Spain 150.
No, I mean with jump math?
Yes.
So much? Wow. Not bad being global. So let's take some of the questions at these Mentimeter. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read them so fast because they move really fast. It says you talk about an inclusive society, but what about the people we don't want to be included, that doesn't want to be included?
I suppose that's the lesson that we're learning around. There was a question on older people as well. How are we tackling that and digital exclusion? And actually, it's the motivation piece that needs to come first. Is that they see themselves as either too old to learn. There's nothing in it for me. They're scared often, and this is for a minority of older people because actually lots do want to go online. And we know that about half of those that don't use the internet or don't use technology do want to learn, and half don't. And actually, for the half that don't, for that, there's actually very little you can do, and it's okay. It's probably okay to go. There's these people that just don't want to be included in that sense. But I think it's important not to mistake the people that probably do want to learn, and it's just about finding the right hook and the motivation, whether that's crafting, whether that's history, whether that's communicating with family or friends. That need to find the right hook in, which will make them learn and develop the skills and reuse that. Right.
Yeah, that's what was said before. We need to start from the need of the person.
Absolutely.
So if the need of the person is I feel alone, and perhaps technology can help you that, then he will he will learn. He will want to be included. But if he doesn't feel alone, and it's a feeling, you can be alone but don't feel alone, then let it go. What is your problem? So respond to the problem, and that's the starting point of everything. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, let's choose one more. I know we had to finish this session at 11, but as we started a bit late, I just want to bring these ideas 5-6 more minutes. So one more, and then we go for the coffee. Let me see which one I choose. Do you want to choose anyone? There is anyone that you really are, any of you, kind of passionate to answer, because there are tons coming around all the time?
There is one on education.
Yeah, I saw one on education. Do you remember it? Because I should find it now again.
Yeah.
Let me see it. Do you remember more or less what was
education needs to change. It has remained in the past.
Yeah. And how do you think education at schools need to change? Kira, the futures of our society and education has not changed at the same rhythm of our society. How technology can help in this change and ensure sustainable and integrative society. So,
and I think education has changed a lot. It has changed a lot, and there is a lot of hunger in schools, in universities, to actually deliver better results. The problem of the change in education, in my opinion, is excessive ideology. Ideology is great to define objectives, but never to define the way in which you reach them, right? So if instead of ideology we start looking at evidence-based kind of innovations, pedagogic innovations, then you will suddenly discover that there are amazing things like Science Bits. Science Bits is an amazing science program promoted by a person from Barcelona that is getting to schools through technology. They are learning science as if you had a lab. You don't have a lab in every school, or you cannot go to a lab every day, but you can teach, through online means. You can teach using, virtual labs. So this is great, Or Vox Prima. Vox Prima is an innovation that teaches children creativity and writing. If you see a child writing today, they do very short texts, they repeat a lot, they don't connect one sentence to another. Vox Prima is basically through drawing and through images, they start promoting a way of doing longer texts, better organized, better structured, more connected, and so on. So there are many innovations out there. Technology is actually allowing us to make it reachable to many. So things are actually changing faster than we think. Perhaps at university, I'm a teacher at university, is slower a bit.
Well, thanks very much, Miquel de Paladella. It was a great pleasure listening to you, founder and CEO of UpSocial. I encourage you to read more about these people. I did it and I loved it. Thanks very much, Sonia Fuertes, Vice President of the Catalan Third Sector Social Platform. Thank you very much. Thanks to Grace Mutung'u, researcher of ECT policies at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. And thank you very much, David McNeill, Digital Director of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organizations. We'll take that change into Wikipedia and adapt it to volunteers. And remember just some quick things that we heard in this session, things that I just noted down. I mean, it's hard to because we commented a lot of things, but adapt and adopt, more effective and fairer results. The digital doesn't have to be the end. It's just a new window, let's say, a new tool, but it doesn't have to be the end. Needs of people, so focus on the needs of the people, focus people-centric, solving new ways to help the people. This is not simple, as you all said. This is not an easy thing, not simple. Security, the outcomes, more participation, more prediction, to be careful that we don't damage our society. And just to finish, read this natural history of innovation so we can all learn a bit more. Thank you very much. Time to grab a coffee. Thanks. Thank you.